Chapter: A True Night. It was starting to get a little chilly in the small hut in the forest. The late afternoon sun hardly penetrated the thick forest canopy, and the fire Adolphus had started was dying down. There was no more wood in the hut, and Max didn't really want to leave the prince and look for more outside. He shivered. "How long do you think they've been gone?" he asked the prince. "It feels like ages," said Cale, throwing himself backward on the bed and trying to wriggle his legs. "I wish I could walk. At least we could go and hide somewhere." "I'm not sure it would do any good," said Max gloomily. "Lady Morgana's a witch, and she'd find us instantly." "Well, you're a wizard, aren't you? Can't you make us invisible? Or something even better? Can't you turn us into dragons?" "I'm not really a wizard," said Max with a sigh. "I'm just learning." There was a muffled noise from the corner where Snotty was wriggling violently on the floor and trying to speak. He had come to a few minutes before, but so far Max had ignored him, apart from checking that the gag and the ropes binding him were secure. Max glanced in his direction and wondered whether to throw a sack over his head. Snotty tried hard to say something. It sounded suspiciously like, "Undo me, you pea-brained pile of dragon's dung." Max raised his eyebrows at Snotty. "Temper, temper," he said, while Snotty writhed angrily and kicked the side of the hut. "Keep quiet or I'll turn you into a frog." Snotty looked skeptical. "I can, you know," said Max. "You wait until the competition tomorrow, then you'll see." Except there probably won't be a competition tomorrow, thought Max gloomily. Or if there was, he wouldn't be there, because he'd have been chopped into small pieces by Morgana and fed to the forest wolves. What a waste of all that Frogspell potion he'd brewed up. Wait a minute. Frogspell potion. It was in his pouch. It had been there all along, ever since Merlin's rooms when he'd given a drop to Olivia and put the bottle in his pouch. What a dung brain not to have thought of it before. Quickly he felt around for it, and then he drew the small blue glass bottle out in triumph. It was unharmed, and still 3/4 full. "Ha! Eat dirt, Snotty, because this will turn you into a frog quicker than you can say Max is a genius, if you so much as think about whispering any more insults." Snotty made a face, but Max noticed that he stopped wriggling and didn't try to say anything either. Max grinned. That had shut Snotty up anyway. But better than that, he now had something he could use if Sir Richard and Lady Morgana turned up. The question was, should he use the potion to turn himself and the prince into frogs so they could hide, or should he use the spell against them? Max sat down slowly by what was left of the fire, holding the little blue bottle of Frogspell potion and thinking hard. If he turned himself and Cale into frogs, they had a good chance of escaping, and Merlin would be able to change them back with a wave of his hand when he arrived. If he arrived. But then there was the chance that they would get caught by Morgana anyway, and Max didn't really fancy being a frog if that happened. The alternative was to try to turn Sir Richard and Lady Morgana into frogs if they arrived. But Max was just an 11-year-old apprentice wizard with one small potion bottle, and Lady Morgana was the most powerful enchantress in the land. For all Max knew, the spell wouldn't even work on her, or she might whip it out of the air by magic and send it hurling back towards him. Max shuddered, remembering her pale eyes, honey voice, and icy tinkling laughter. But then he thought about the last time he had gone to his father and asked not to be a knight because he was rubbish at swordplay. "Being a knight isn't about how good you are with a sword, Max," Sir Bertram had said, holding him up by the shoulders and looking at him seriously. "Being a knight is about facing up to your fears, sticking up for others, even if you're scared, doing your best even when you think you're no good. Even wizards need to be a knight first and foremost. And I know you can be a good knight, Max. I know you've got it in you." Those are some good things. I hope you guys also think about being knights all the time. So that means that you'd need to stick up for others, face your fears even when you're scared, and do your best even when you think you're not good at it. And if you do all those things, you'll do really pretty good in life. Then he slapped Max on the back so hard he nearly sent him flying and told him, "Get on out there and give him what for." So Max, inspired, had climbed back on his horse and whacked at the practice dummy so hard he would have sliced its head off with one blow if his horse hadn't shied at the last minute so that he fell off instead. Remembering this conversation now, Max smiled. He knew what Sir Bertram would have said about his dilemma. Max sighed and went to find a good place to hide near the door of the hut. I don't know what can have happened to Adrian, my lady, apologized Sir Richard, sweating inside his heavy riding coat. Drat that boy! Where was he? Why weren't the horses here? Had they made it through the forest? It does seem rather inefficient, Sir Richard, said Lady Morgana in her low, sweet voice. But no matter, I'm sure they'll be here in good time. Perhaps we should wait in the hut. Of course, my lady, splendid idea. If you'll just permit me to take your hand. Take her hand, thought Sir Richard. Over the moon. Him? Holding the arm of the most powerful woman in the whole kingdom. He was really on the way up. He chortled happily to himself as they crossed the threshold together. His eyes had barely taken in the sight of Snotty lying tied up and gagged on the stone floor of the hut when he was hit in the face by a blob of blue gunk. Next thing he knew, the room had gone all shivery and strange, and he was suddenly very much shorter than usual. Next to him was what seemed like an unnaturally large acid green frog with violently puce spots, looking as angry as he had ever seen a frog look. A second later there was a pop, and the frog disappeared. Phew, said Max, sitting down suddenly on the stone floor of the hut. I'm glad that's over. The single remaining frog, a sludgy brown one with orange spots, croaked at him reprovingly. Max Pendragon, it said in a deep frog voice, I am very disappointed in you, turning respectable grown-ups into frogs. I think I might have to have words with your father. Turn me back this instant. Not likely, muttered Max. He scooped the frog up and put it in his belt pouch, where he couldn't hear it croaking any more, and then turned to the prince. Well, your highness, it looks like we're safe now. We just have to wait for Merlin to arrive. That was brilliant, said Cale, wide-eyed. Max grinned. Yes, it was pretty cool, wasn't it? He said happily. When Merlin and the others arrived at the hut in the forest, Max had collected enough wood to get the fire roaring and brewed up a whole cauldron of spiced apple juice. He and Cale were sitting happily by the fire, munching the rest of Snotty's supplies and telling bad jokes. Well, well, said Merlin as he crossed the threshold. It appears we are rather too late for any rescuing. You seem to have rescued yourself pretty thoroughly. Max was amazing, said Cale, jumping up and staggering over to hug Merlin. His eyes were still not quite right, but the spell was wearing off fast. He punched the big boy and then turned the grown-ups into frogs. He was a really good wizard, Merlin. He's even better than you. Max swallowed and went pink, but he didn't have time to protest because Olivia hurled herself at him and gave him a huge bear hug, and Ferocious scampered over and nipped his ankles affectionately. Meanwhile, Adolphus flapped around their heads, getting his feet and wings tangled up in his excitement. You're okay, Max. You're okay. I'm so glad. We had no idea what had happened, exclaimed Olivia when she had enough breath. I can't believe you sorted out Sir Richard and her. You must have been terrified. Oh, it was nothing, said Max airily. But then he caught Merlin's piercing gray eyes and decided he had better be truthful. Actually, I was terrified, he admitted. And so you should have been, said Merlin. Morgana Le Fay is an extremely dangerous and powerful sorceress. You did very well to deal with her as successfully as you obviously have. I presume she, disappeared after you changed her? Yes, there was a sort of a pop, and she was gone, but I've got Sir Richard in my belt pouch. Merlin laughed, a rich, warm, and infectious laugh they all found themselves joining in with, and then he clapped Max on the shoulder. Well done, Max, really. A most extraordinary spell, and you showed real bravery to see it through. It takes a special sort of magic to brew up a Frogspell potion, most rare and unusual. I am glad to see the ability goes with a good heart and courage as well. You'll make a fine wizard, my boy, very fine indeed. Max felt warm all over at the praise, but looking up at this fierce tall knight so unlike the Merlin he imagined, he knew that he had to be honest. Actually, he said, I didn't exactly make the frog spell. It was more of an accident, and I only knocked Snotty over by accident too, and I had my eyes closed when I threw the potion at Lady Morgana. If I'd had to open them, I'd probably have missed. Merlin looked down at Max gravely and then smiled. Max, you're very honest, but it's not just the ingredients that make a frog spell. It may have been an accident to start with, but only a very powerful sort of magic will make it work. And if you did knock this young squire over by accident, or hit my lady by accident, you did so because you were standing up to them in the first place, which takes a good deal of courage. I think you have a most unusual sort of magic, and a good heart, Max Pendragon, and I shall watch your next accident with interest. Max looked up at Merlin's bright eyes and hawk-like face and suddenly felt 6 feet tall. He knew he would follow Merlin to the end of the world if he could. He grinned, and Merlin clapped him on the shoulder again. Still, he sighed, there's a little doubt that my lady is long gone, and will certainly have a very good alibi prepared for her part in this, and unfortunately she is likely to get away with it. The king has a very forgiving heart where that lady's concerned. Too forgiving, I fear, he added, looking grim. Then he smiled at them all and said, Right, enough standing around. I think it's time we headed back to the castle. We need to take this princeling back to his mother, and while we're at it, we'd better take this well-trussed-up young man and his befrogged father to the king. And that's the end of the chapter.